Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with drdan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage counseling using the Ep2 method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one session in English or in French, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV therapy and coaching services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoachddanamzallag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have, for our second episode of season 9, a very special guest and Stoic expert, Mr. Brandon Tomlin. And just like every of my past episodes, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Brandon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to talk to you about Stoicism and see where our expertise sort of mingle. So my name is Brandon Tomlin, as you mentioned. I'm, I suppose, a philosopher of sorts, focused generally around Stoicism, but I dig into all kinds of things, Christianity principles, works of fiction. I'm really interested in psychology, neuroscience, and I basically bring a lot of these topics together in a form that I think is understandable by a lot of people. And so I host my own podcast called the Strong Stoic Podcast, where I 20-minute episodes on topics based around Stoic principles, generally speaking, where I tie in a lot of other things. I also have guests on as well, the Stoic experts and psychologists, all kinds of people. So I'm really interested in bringing everything that we have at our disposal, fiction, science, ancient philosophy, bring it all together and basically try and figure out what it means to live a good life.
Beautiful. Okay, so when we first had our conversation, Brandon, you got me curious about what Stoicism is. So I've done my research, and it says that it is the philosophy of life. So it basically teaches, or it's a science of a person that endures pain and suffering without really demonstrating or letting out their emotion to the general public. So how can someone really wrap their mind on what does it mean when someone suffers inside but yet keeps everything? Doesn't that usually, like, if you like focus on psychology aspect, they bundle up all these emotions to eventually explode like a volcano. So how can that work in synergy with psychology?
Yes, this is a great first place to start, because this is actually a very common misconception of Stoicism. If you look up, if you Google Stoicism, you find essentially two definitions. You find the one you're talking about there, which is more of a, I suppose, a personality way of dealing with things. It's this sort of stiff upper lip, just endure pain, don't show any emotions. That is a form of Stoicism. And then there's the Stoicism of ancient philosophy, of ancient Greece, which is the philosophy of life that you're speaking to. So it's very important to distinguish between those two. And I know there's a lot of confusion on this in modern world, because you say someone's Stoic, normally what people think about is that sort of, that tough person that doesn't want to show any emotion. Whereas the philosophy of Stoicism is it's a lot deeper than that. And it actually doesn't suppress emotions at all. The ancient Stoics were actually more trying to figure out how to control the emotions, and also particularly the dangerous ones like anger and rage, to mitigate those so that they don't negatively impact the life around you. But to basically, it's not about suppressing emotion in terms of the philosophy of Stoicism, but it's about utilizing emotion and making sure that, in your anger or any other of the toxic emotions, you don't wreak havoc on your life and the world around you.
So can a therapist or psychologist, if let's say they have a patient that practice Stoicism, can they really learn about that person and their four virtues about life and everything that follows? I mean, can they really understand the person that because they're following a Stoic life, they do not want to demonstrate anything such as anger, emotion, or anything of that sort? So how can they live in an environment that everyone express themselves much openly, versus them that I have to not suppress, as you mentioned, but keep everything in?
Yeah, I mean, and it's very complicated, and these things are, virtue, which is really what Stoicism is about. It's more of a habit than anything else. So let's say that you are someone that has anger issues. Anger would be, or expressing anger in a bad way. Maybe you're in traffic and you get angry. That is a vice in Stoicism. So like, how do you go about mitigating that? Well, the Stoics really, they have a lot of techniques for this. Marcus Aurelius, famous emperor, Stoic, he had a lot of different ways of dealing with anger. And all of these actually stem, you can see these in modern psychology today. One of the things that he recommends is actually to premeditate on those situations in life when you're going to be angry. So if you are someone, for example, that does get angry in traffic and you just happen to find yourself, you feel like, okay, you have to leave work a little early or late today. And so you're going to be driving when there's traffic. So this. Normally you work around it because it gives you anger issues. Well, one of the Stoic ways of dealing with that is, okay, I'm going to drive in traffic at 5 p.m. I know that's going to make me angry. How am I going to mitigate that? Can I premeditate on that and see how that feels like? What techniques am I going to use to calm down? And so this is sort of a premeditation of evils, which is a key Stoic practice. But that's just one example. There's lots of Stoic ways of dealing with anger, but this one I find very powerful because, how many of us in the morning will wake up and we get immediate anxiety about the people we have to deal with at work, or the traffic, or maybe you and your wife had a fight last night and now you have to deal with that. Like, how many of these situations in life do we wake up in the morning and the first thing we feel is anxiety about the life we have? And one of the Stoic ways of dealing with that is to premeditate on that and to understand and make a plan for how you can actually deal with that when it comes up. So does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Also, during my research, it says that Stoicism recognizes those 4 types of virtues, which is wisdom, courage, justice, and moderation. So can someone do they have to have all 4 to be following Stoicism? Or if, let's say, they have issue with one specific virtue, how's that in the world of Stoicism? Is it practice religiously, or how does it go?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the 4 cardinal virtues you're speaking to, these are, and the cardinal meaning every other virtue, such as honesty, patience, they all hinge from these virtues. But they're actually, it's common to think about them in terms of 4 pillars that hold up Stoicism, but it's a lot more complicated than that because they depend on each other quite a bit. So let me give an example. So you mentioned wisdom. Wisdom is one of the 4 cardinal virtues, and it basically means knowing what to do, when to do it, as well as knowing yourself, knowing other people. It's having the information and the knowledge at hand and also knowing how to deal with that. So wisdom is a very important Stoic virtue. It's one of the 4 cardinal virtues, but there's also things like courage. Okay, courage is also a cardinal virtue, meaning when you are afraid, how do I deal with that fear? So, courage is really important in life because we are burdened with fear all the time. But these 2 virtues, just to give an example, they don't exist independently of each other. You can imagine if you're in a battlefield, the courageous response, you might argue, would be to run out into a machine gun fire, and well, guess what? Now you're dead. So that's not good for anyone. So you have to temper your courage with wisdom. And so the point is that, and we can go into more details about what these virtues mean, but they're really intermingled, and it's hard to sort of explain how they're intermingled until you get into a lot of examples with it. But in fact, but Aristotle actually thought that if you had one virtue, you had them all.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have one, because they're intermingled so much, you can't just have one. You have to have all 4, at least to some degree. So yeah.
But does it mean that without wisdom or without courage, you cannot have wisdom, or without wisdom, you cannot have justice? So you said they're all interconnected somehow. But the thing is that also, isn't there one core virtue that really is the heart of all of Stoicism, and then everything kind of gravitates around it?
Yeah, if you had to pick one of the 4 cardinal virtues that was the most important, it would probably be wisdom, just because wisdom is, and this is an age-old axiom: know thyself. Part of wisdom is knowing yourself and knowing, your capacity for good, your capacity for evil, your strengths, your weaknesses, how you can best interact with the world. And so if you had to pick just one, it would be wisdom. But again, these are so intermingled in a sense, right? In fact, wisdom and temperance, which is one of the other 4 cardinal virtues, these are really 2 of the foundations of all Western philosophy, not just Stoicism. So temperance meaning moderation, had nothing in excess. We hear this all the time, talk about it all the time: nothing in excess, everything in moderation, including moderation. So sometimes you need to indulge, right? So these two, probably wisdom slightly more important, but they're all equally important. It's hard to give more importance to one.
I see. And when it comes to those who live like a minimalistic life, are they following stoicism to a certain extent, or those who do not want, they want to live off the grid, or they want to live like those tiny homes, like 300 square foot at home? So does it mean that if they live like a very isolated life, is it a form of stoicism?
Not particularly. It can be. So the main tenet in Stoicism is that you have to be a part of society. It's really important in Stoicism to contribute to your society. And that's why justice is one of the cardinal virtues, right? Justice exists to create a better society. It's not that you can't live in isolation and be a Stoic, but I think generally speaking, for most people, we don't want to go live in a cabin by ourselves. We're all social beings to some extent. And part of Stoicism is living according to human nature, which is that sociability element of human experience.
So how long have you been following this type of philosophy? I mean, were you like that? Did you like one day when you were in high school or early 20s, did you just like something clicked? I said, I want to live that life. Or how did you get into living Stoic life?
Yeah, I actually have a weird entry into Stoicism. I sort of fell backwards into it. So I grew up quite humbly. I grew up on the east coast of Canada in a small fishing village. And what you'll find is a lot of these humble industries, physical labor, a lot of the Stoic principles are part of that work because they have to be. One of the core tenets in Stoicism is the dichotomy of control, which means you focus on what's within your control, and then you try not to worry so much about the things that are outside of your control, because they're outside of your control. You can't do anything about it. So just to give an example, when I was growing up, and a hurricane was coming through, one of the things you have to do when the storm is coming is you have to tie up the boat extra tight. You need to shut the doors, make sure you tie the doors back so that they don't fly open, and you have to prepare. But you can't change the fact that the storm is coming. Now, that doesn't mean you throw up your hands up and do nothing. You have to prepare. You have to do what you can, focus on what you can control, but understand that at the end of the day, when that storm gets here, you just got to hang tight and hope for the best. And so my entry into Stoicism was sort of backwards. I learned a lot of the principles just through how I grew up, and then fell backwards into it when I started reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations and some of the Stoic texts. I started reading it, and it was more like something I wrote. Not that I would have written anything so prestigious as the Stoic text, but it just seemed to me to be more my natural way of thinking, and so I sort of naturally fell into it.
So do they in that science or that philosophy, do they encourage to be more proactive than reactive in terms of always preparing, especially in the dichotomy of control, where you cannot control everything, and the things that are out of your control, you just have to accept them? But as you said, if a storm is coming, you have to be proactive and not just let the storm come and say, oops, I didn't prepare. I didn't put the anything in my house, windows, protecting the door, etc. So is it more to encourage proactivity?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. And this is a misconception, because part of what people read into something like the dichotomy of control is like, well, okay, if I can't control the storm, then I'm just going to throw my hands up and do nothing. And it's like, no, that's not right. You have to use wisdom, right? You have to understand that there are things that I can do now. And so this whole dichotomy of control thing, some people use it to get out of responsibility. Like, I can't control what my boss does, so I'm just going to slack at work. It's like, well, no, but you can control how you communicate to your boss. Like, are you being rude in how you speak, and therefore you're creating a bad relationship between you two? At the end of the day, we do have influence, even though other people are externals. We have no control over them. It's not that you don't have any influence over situations. You have to maximize your agency. So the dichotomy of control is not an excuse to throw your hands up and not do anything. In fact, it should be the opposite. It's a call to action, to be proactive, to do what you have to do to maximize your agency given the circumstances that you are in.
So it's basically taking accountability of your own behavior to be able to change the circumstances around you.
Absolutely. It's all about accountability. It's everything is your responsibility, and everything is your fault in a sense. You take on, it's sort of like the Christ image, taking on all the sins of the world. It's something like that. So not so much in a salvation sort of way, but in a just as a responsibility. Like, as a Stoic, you have a responsibility to try and make the world a better place. It's not enough to just seek pleasure and party all the time and, work your 9 to 5 and then go home. And not that you can do a lot of great work in a 9 to 5 job, don't get me wrong, but I also see a lot of people that they go to work and they check out and, they're just sort of getting by. And the Stoic approach is no, you have an obligation to make the world a better place and to use your strengths through wisdom, through knowing yourself and to do that.
I know I'm not sure if you would agree or disagree. And this, most of my podcasts, I never want to enter anything about religion or anything of that sort. But the religion and philosophy, especially in Stoicism, I mean, is there like a synergy between both in some way or another? Or do some believe in Catholicism or Judaism, but yet would say, no, Stoicism is completely against my belief because of this or that? So is there like some kind of like the theory of general relativity and quantum physics, or quantum mechanics, I'm sorry, they will not really match because there's something missing in between for it to have to be correlated properly. So how does that work in religion and philosophy?
Yeah, that's interesting. There's actually some debate now about whether or not Stoicism is considered a religion. And it depends how you define a religion. Like today we think about religion in terms of organized religion, like
Correct.
Catholicism, right? But in my opinion, I've done a lot of research on ancient religions and philosophies. I would define a religion as a way of life where something is sacred. And that seems to fit every definition. And you might ask, well, what's sacred in Stoicism? And I would argue that, well, the whole belief that virtue is the only good, to me, it's an article of faith, and then it's a way of life. And you can't prove that. I can't prove to you that if you be a good person, things are going to be better for you in 10 years. I have no way of proving that. You have to take that on faith and then live it out and see what happens. And so to me, virtue, those 4 cardinal virtues we spoke to, if you choose to be a Stoic, you have to accept that those are above you, that you don't get to pick and choose when to be just or when to be wise. There is discretion in how you use those virtues because life is very complicated. But you can't just, you're not a god. You can't just decide, okay, well, today I'm not going to uphold justice, or I'm going to be viceful. That's not the Stoic approach at all. And so to me, if we define religion as a way of life where something is sacred, and in Stoicism, the way of life is sacred, virtue, being a good person, and assuming that is going to, or believing that that's going to make life better for you and everyone around you, that's a belief system. To me, it does have elements of a religion.
It does, yes. And actually, I did some studies in Kabbalah, and they do talk a lot about Stoicism. It's incredible because the thing is that, okay, Kabbalah is basically an advanced science above and beyond the Jewish religion. It's like really, it's mysticism. Some people think it's mysticism, but it goes above and beyond that. So when I studied it, I was really amazed on how much of those four virtues they talk about, and the correlation between the Kabbalah and Stoicism, etc., about how to be a good person, justice, moderation, etc. But they use different words, synonymous to those words.
Right.
But it's interesting on how the connection between all religion and so when you said about Stoicism can be a religion, but at the same time it is a philosophy of life. But yet people sometimes, when you look at how they live their life, and then some people very dishonest way, and then on Sunday they go to church thinking that they're the greatest person on earth. Right. So it's interesting on how people they look at what religion is, but yet after Sunday night or starting Monday morning, they could behave the way they want.
Well, yeah, and all what you sort of pointed to there is that all religions, meaning organized religions, the way we think about religion, like Catholicism, there is a really deep philosophy embedded into that religion. There's a whole practice along with it. Go to church on Sundays, do your prayers, all that stuff. That there's practices around it, but there is an underlying philosophy underneath there. Now, when you get into organized religion, this is where it gets complicated because you have things like the church. Now, when you have something like the church, now are they the authority on everything? Are they the authority, and can they change things and dictate it? And that's why Christianity it's survived so long, but it's also very divided within its own ranks.
Correct.
And but yeah, I mean, you could even argue that Stoicism is the foundation of Christianity because it has the same four cardinal virtues and maybe a couple more, but generally speaking, the virtue ethics are very similar to Stoicism. And in fact, Stoicism is about 500 years older than Christianity. So there's also a historical, it's not just, if you take apart Stoicism and Christianity, you find similarities. It's historically, Stoicism has had a huge impact on the development of religions like Christianity.
So on the day-to-day, the day-to-day life of Brendan Tumblin, how do you, what kind of work do you do outside of, not outside of Stoicism, but how do you live your life? Here you go. That's the typical.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I'm a project manager. So I manage ship operations, tug and barge operations. And so I'm dealing a lot with weather. I'm dealing with a lot of people that I don't have direct control over. And I'm a strength coach on the side. I'm a weightlifter. I'm a musician. I'm all kinds of things. But I would say in terms of how Stoicism, I guess that's the question, how Stoicism works its way into there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it works its way into everything I do, to be honest. Work, if you take the dichotomy of control, at the end of the day, if I have a project that has to start on January 1st and a big storm comes through, well, I can get angry and frustrated at that. Or I can say, well, I can't change the weather. I'm not going to force the boat to go into a weather where they could potentially die, because that's not wise at all. So I'm not going to throw my hands up, but I'm going to accept the fact that I can't change that. I use Stoicism in work all the time. I also use Stoicism in the gym. It's the same basic principles. You have times where things aren't going so well in the gym. You have times where things are going really well in the gym. How do you navigate those bad times? How do you stay oriented and humble in the positive times? And what you'll find is that Stoicism is it's a structure, and you can take that structure and apply it to anything. That's been my experience. I meet so many different types of Stoics. It's fascinating.
And when you interact with people, do you have the tendency to be able to share with them your beliefs or your science?
Yeah, I would say in subtle ways. People are a little weirded out by philosophy. It's interesting because in ancient Greece, this is what they did. They talked about how do we be happy, how do we live the best life. And today it's kind of weird, but you slip that stuff in there. Like, so let's go back to that storm example. The captain of the boat calls me, hey, Brandon, listen, I know we got to be here on January 1st, but there's this big storm coming, and now I'm kind of angry and all the crew are upset. And I can choose to respond to that with, well, we can't control the weather. We can't control the weather. So do what you can to prepare for the storm, maximize your agency, and we'll go from there when the storm ends up. Now, if I were to go into, well, Marcus Aurelius, when he was faced with a similar situation and start talking about the details of Stoicism, he might get a little weirded out. But if I address it subtly in a modern way, people tend to respond to it so well.
So is it more because your tone is calm and collected that you project this kind of behavior, where on the other side, because obviously if you get angry, they're going to end up getting angry, but because you're calm and you tell them how that it's completely out of your control, they adapt that kind of behavior. So is it more your attitude more than anything else?
Absolutely. And people respond to that. It's almost, and there's this weird thing, I'd be interested to see what you hear in your profession, but people tend to get these habits into them where, okay, there's a storm coming, let's get angry. Like, let's get angry about that. Like, they might not even be angry about it, but because it's like part of the culture to show frustration at something like bad weather is coming. All of a sudden, weather's here. Okay, well, better play the character, let's get angry about this. And I see that all the time. And so how do you change culture? Well, you embody a different type of culture. As opposed to getting worked up about it, you say, okay, well, it's a storm. You can't change it. Let's prepare. And that's it.
Well, you do make a good point, but at the same time, in certain situations, when it comes to human nature, people get angry about, let's say, the storm, because that will stop them from doing something else. So let's say they had to go to a ball game, whatever it is, the storm will stop them from participating in it. That's why they will get angry. But if they had really no plans, they would just shrug their shoulder. Oh, well, storm is coming. Who cares?
Yeah, that's a great point.
It's an interruption of their schedule, what they were supposed to do. And that's why they get angry or frustrated, is because their plan is thrown to the garbage.
Yeah. And this is where, to get back to something we mentioned earlier, this premeditation of evils, that's where that comes into play. So I get it, man. Like if you're working 5 days a week and then all of a sudden you get this weekend off, and normally you have to work the weekends, but you finally get a weekend off and you want to go skiing with your family, and then a big storm comes through. I get it. But us, and I really get that. I really do. But a key Stoic practice there is, when you're making those plans, well, what if weather comes? Okay, well, if weather comes, what else does my family like to do? Well, we love playing board games. So why don't we pick up some new board games?
Mhm.
And you can still, it's like having a plan B, just in case things go wrong.
So you encourage always to look at life with adding alternatives to your life to be able to avoid being frustrated by the original plan.
Yeah, I mean, we do this in work all the time. Like when you start a project, one of the things you do, it's called a risk register. You sit down with your team and you meditate, what could possibly go wrong? And then you list everything out. And then you say, well, if that goes wrong, what are we going to do? And then you list it out. If that goes wrong, what are we going to do? And you list that out. You make a plan for how to address all the things that could potentially go wrong. Now, you might not, like, life is so complicated. Something might pop out of nowhere. But if you've had enough of those items, at least you've filled in the blanks enough that you can appropriate a response more accurately in the moment, even though it might not be exactly what. Maybe it's a copy paste, maybe it's something similar, right? You can take that plan and apply it.
So that's basically training your mind to always think about, if something hits the fan, I'm not going to use the bad word here, then this is what I will expect to do. Even though you cannot predict every outcome, especially in the storm, we don't know if the storm is going to change direction, whatever it is, then you can say, okay, we'll do this. But if that storm changes angle, then, well, I was not expecting that, but yet I already prepared myself for plan B or plan C or plan D. So now I know how to react, and there's not going to be any more stress level because of that reaction and that anticipation of issues rising.
Yeah. And it's also, like, I'm sure you've had an experience like this. I've had many experiences like this where I have a plan in place, let's say to spend time with a family member or something like that, and the plan goes to shit for whatever reason. And then we do something else, and it's like one of the most memorable times I've ever had with that person. And so part of this as well is this idea of providence and Stoicism, which is everything has happened as it should have, which is it's another faith-based argument.
Mhm.
Things are meant to be. This was meant to be. And part of that is, okay, well, I can't go skiing with my family. I can be angry about that, and we can ruin the weekend, or we can find something else to do. I mean, I've had wonderful experiences with people that wasn't part of the plan, but because we've accepted it and moved on, you grow closer together through that experience, and in dealing with that experience. And not, you're like, are you going to become closer with your family if you throw your hands up and get angry? Like, what's the point of the ski trip? To become closer with your family.
Exactly.
What are you going to do if the ski trip gets canceled? Well, are there other ways to get closer with your family? I hope so.
Oh, yes.
So find something else to do.
That's a good point. So if any of our listeners are really curious to hear more about Stoicism, how can they find you, Brandon?
Yeah, so check me out at The Strong Stoic. I'm on, my podcast is everywhere: Apple Podcast, Spotify, all the good ones. And also on Instagram, I'm pretty active on there. Twitter, find me at The Strong Stoic. I love meeting new people. I also have a Telegram chat, which I have a community on there where we talk about all things philosophy and Stoicism and life. So yeah, I'd love to hear from people for sure.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Brendan, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. And I really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with this new philosophy of life. Or we'll not say new, but yours. We hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 9 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened to today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts. Just like the laws of attraction, thought become things. And what comes in between to fully reap the benefit of these laws is to put in the action and belief. Nothing in life will come easier. Just like creating thoughts in your mind, you will need to focus more on the nature of these thoughts. It is certain that living a stoic life can allow you to deal with stress, difficult challenges without appearing affected by these hurdles. But if you allow these negative thoughts to linger for too long, the end result can be detrimental to your well-being. It is hard to fathom those thoughts crosses your mind at the rate of one thought per second, or around 70,000 thoughts per day, as per Dr. Deepak Chopra. However, because of the speed of thoughts, nothing important is recorded by your mind if these thoughts aren't valuable in nature. All you really need to do is focus on what matters to you and how you can better your life from one day to the next. My name is Dr. Dan Amzalag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.